And I'll do our introduction. So, hey, thanks everybody for joining us for the deep dive on CloudRadial Chat. I'm Ricky Cicchini, the VP of Product of CloudRadial. With me today is the father of chat, really. It's Chris Dix, the Director of Conversational Interfaces. Hello, Chris. And then I also have Safi Ferris. She is currently I believe the CRO of the company is the current title, although she is, like me, has been around and done many roles, and she's going to be helping out. So if anybody has any follow-up questions, if there's anything we can get to in the chat, we will. If there's anything we can't get to, we'll either ask Chris or get to you after the show, so no big deal. So feel free to just chuck stuff in chat. We'll be watching it if that works for everybody. And like I was saying earlier, we're going to stick to not a PowerPoint. This is definitely not just us going through a bunch of slides. I want to briefly give an overview of CloudRadial and what CloudRadial is. CloudRadial is ultimately, it's everything client. So if you've never heard of us, it's the one-stop shop between primarily MSPs, really any IT service provider. And our aim is to take a lot of your client-facing processes, automate them, streamline them, and basically help you communicate and show your value better to clients in a bunch of different ways. We traditionally talk about CloudRadial. Most of the time, if you'll hear it out there in the market, we're talking about our client portal. That's our, you'll see that as CloudRadial CSA. There's also CloudRadial Portal 365. And then what we're talking about today isn't either one of those things, although I'm sure it'll, like I was saying earlier, bleed into how they work together. Today, we're specifically talking about CloudRadial Chat, which is actually much more than chat. It's really AI power or not, and it has a lot of assistant capabilities, and it's something that can really up your game as far as communicating with clients. So I'll hand it over to Chris, and I think Chris has a pretty sweet demo for us to talk about. And again, questions come up, you have thoughts, whatever, chuck them in the chat. I'll get to them, and we'll kind of fill them in as Chris goes through everything, if that works for you. So Chris, please take it away. I'll stop my screen share and stop talking for a little bit, if I can do that.
Sure thing. Thanks, Ricky. Hi everybody. It's great to be able to participate in something like this and to get to show some of what we've worked on. If you think it's good to just go straight to a demo, Ricky, that's there.
Please.
All right, then that is what I am going to do. So share my screen and
yep. Got you.
Perfect. CloudRadial Chat is about making your customers more accessible to you, more responsive, and meeting them where they are. And so in order to do that, we support several different ways to chat with your customers, because chat doesn't mean just one thing to everyone. It's really very much about what demographic you are, what age, what industry you're working in. We'll decide what kind of tools you might be using to do what you call chat. And so, of course, one of the things we do is support putting chat on your website. So it's an HTML snippet that you can embed on your homepage or multiple pages on your site. And it gives a pretty familiar interface, that chat box that pops up when people click on an avatar or when something happens on the page. We also support embedding CloudRadial Chat inside the CSA portal so that you can chat with your customers there. And for that purpose, we are already authenticating the customer as they come over. So they've already signed into the portal. We know who they are. If they come in from just a website, we don't know who they are. It could be anybody. So we have an authentication step for that. Now, I mentioned that we can handle chat from a couple of different channels communication-wise. We also support adding this to your customer's Teams tenant. So it can be an app that shows up inside their tenant, and that looks something like this. So it just shows up as an app in the list, and they can chat directly with that. It can also be put into a Slack workspace. So if you have a customer who wants to use Slack, but you are a Teams shop, then you can let them use what they're most comfortable with and still use the tools you prefer on your side. So Slack and Teams, also pre-authenticated. We know who they are based on the email address that comes over. I'm going to walk through an example that does the authentication steps so you can see what it would be like for your customer if they were to just come to your homepage. So I'm going to say I'm a customer looking for support. And then that's going to give me a chance to authenticate myself. So I can put in my email address or a mobile phone number, or do an Office 365 authentication. And then if in the case of email and phone, we're going to send a short security code to the customer just to verify that they are who they say they are. So I'm going to send myself a security code. And once I get that code, then I'm going to put it back into the chat, and that will let the system know that I am at this particular phone number or email address. But the authentication is a two-step process when it's put on your website or someplace like this, because they might not be a customer. They could be a lead. And so in that case, we can give a different conversation interface, give them some options to still chat with you, just not in the context of being a contact in your PSA. But in this case, I am a contact. I'm set up in the ConnectWise instance that we have as Latoya here. And so it's going to give me some options that make sense for a contact. So I can report a new issue. I can check on an existing issue. I can even see a list of my open tickets. But so I'll go ahead and I'll report an issue, just open a new ticket. And so if I say something like, so there are a couple different tiers to the application. We have a starter, professional, enterprise, and we can get into that a little bit later. But so in the starter tier, what we do after they say something like my email is not working is just ask a general details kind of questions. You have some additional information. Take that, and using all of that in their contact record, create a ticket. In this case, we're doing a little bit more, and this is where we're using some of the AI features that are available to people today to ask some follow-up questions based on their initial problem. So if they say my email is not working, we're going to try to ask the first couple of questions that your tech might have had to ask anyway when the ticket got to them. So in this case, they're asking, of course, for just a little more information than my email is not working, which is a little helpful. So say, emails. Asking me what email provider I'm using. Now, lots of times you probably already know that, and we can tweak the AI questions to not ask things like this, and also to ask specific questions that might be relevant to your customers or your process. But I can say, and asking me if I'm receiving error messages. No error. And so once we've collected a little bit of information like this, we can summarize it, go ahead and create the ticket, get it into ConnectWise. So if I click here, we try not to ask too many questions to keep the conversation under control. But now we've let them know that there's a ticket that's assigned to them. And so if we look in ConnectWise, we've got our new ticket. It's assigned to the contact, and the initial description is based on the triage questions, a summary. And so that's the first half of the chat. The customer side to open a ticket. The next part is where I think it gets really cool, which is the part that's for you, the MSP. So in this case, we've set up a channel or multiple channels inside of either Teams or Slack. So those are the two tools that we support on the MSP side. And inside that channel, we'll create a new thread, a new notification about this chat-based ticket. And so here's the adaptive card that gets created, and it has a bunch of buttons on it that are configurable, and they're productivity hacks, basically. So if you want to add a note or change the status of the ticket directly from Teams, you can do that. You can also jump straight to the ticket or the contact. And we can do other things in here as well that I'll show a little bit more later. But that will, the coolest thing about this is the ability to connect live chat from either Teams or Slack, whatever you're using for your internal chat, to whatever the customer is using. So if I click live chat, it's going to connect me in this conversation to the customer. And I can show you what that looks like from the customer side as well. So if you see there, I'm joining the chat. And It's actually transferring the conversation to me, the tech who clicked live chat. And so now anything I say will go to the customer, and anything they say will come back to me. And so it doesn't matter where the customer came from. If they came from the website, inside the CSA portal, if they are coming in via text message, because we can support texting as well, Teams, Slack, anything we can build on the customer side will still go to your teams, and you can handle it all in one place, all in a tool you're already using. So you don't have to add another tool to your stack to handle customer chat. And you don't have to add another tool to get that data into the PSA. And so if the customer has a file, say they've taken a screenshot, or they have a log file or something that would help you troubleshoot the issue, they can send that in. It's handy if they're like out in the field and need to take a picture of something with their phone, and that can come right into the conversation and help you work the problem. This could go on for a while. This conversation could go back and forth, to get the ticket resolved. But just like the tech decided when to do a live response, it's also up to them to decide when to close down the conversation. And so a couple of different ways we can do that. There's this handy end chat button here that can close the conversation. There's also timeouts we can set. So after a period of inactivity, it'll close down. But we also add these slash commands, and I think this is one of the things we'll touch on a little bit later in the deep dive too, is these slash commands are triggering automations that we can script for you that will do things to the ticket, to Teams, to email or texting, anything our system is connected to. We can build these slash commands to give you productivity hacks inside of Teams. And so if I say slash close, it's going to close this conversation, not necessarily the ticket, but we do have the ability to automatically update the ticket status based on closing the conversation. But in this case, it's going to take the customer back to their starting point in the conversation. And then it's actually going to auto-suggest a time entry for me, the tech, based on the duration of the conversation and what happened. So it's a suggestion so that they can still adjust the values here to fit what actually happened in their perspective, how long it was, maybe longer, maybe shorter than the duration of the chat. But I can say, let's set this to this. This all looks good. I'll add the time. And so now we're going to add a time entry and then also trigger some additional automations in the background, namely updating ticket statuses and also collecting all the information that happened in the conversation and getting that into the ticket as well. And so I take a quick look over here. So now we've got our updated ticket. We've moved to this status. We've now got two new notes here in the ticket as well. One is the transcript that happened after the live chat took over. The other is actually the transcript that happened before the live chat took over. So you have a record of that as well. And then we have our time entry, and also any files that were exchanged wind up as attachments in the ticket. So, so it's just a way to add live chat and automated chat support to your PSA and your process with the minimal impact of new tools. And I've talked for several minutes now, and I should probably stop and take a break. So.
I know how I feel. Pretty good.
Thanks.
Do you feel like you're kind of talking to yourself because you're kind of chatting to yourself and then you're chatting yourself back?
You start to say weird things to yourself after a while.
I was going to say that might be an issue.
Yeah.
To watch for.
It's probably not good for me long term, but I've made it this far.
Well, I have a couple of questions that I'd like to run through, because what I think we can do is we can kind of talk a little bit about the functionality, how it ties into the greater strategy, and also something we didn't do, because again, for those that don't know, we actually had a little bit of let's call it a tease of this yesterday in a separate webinar. We can kind of look through some of the use cases, if that's cool with you, and just talk about how the management of it works. So again, if anybody has any any questions, if things come up, this jogs people's memories of stuff, just go ahead and ask. I'll take over for just a brief sec, Chris. We can just talk over some things, if that's cool with you.
Absolutely.
So let me give your vocal cords a shred of a break. Okay, so a couple questions that usually come up, especially when we look at, different software providers, is number one is like, where did this come from? How long has it been around, and what's chat style? What is that? Where did that come from? So how long has your, for those that don't know, CloudRadial Chat was actually chat style in the past. Chris was the creator of that, is the creator of that. And, it's something that CloudRadial as a company acquired, really liked his stuff. But how long had you been working on chat style to begin with?
Oh yeah, so I started working on it about 2.5 years ago, I think. It started off, like a lot of these things, not exactly how it ended, but a lot of it came out of conversations with friends of mine who I would do software development work for, who were MSPs, and I kept hearing the same stories about how the chat tools they had available to them for their PSAs were not doing the job, and they needed something different, something that that their customers would actually use and enjoy, and that they could that would really give them the capabilities they wanted. So yeah, that's how chat style got started, and yeah, it's been good work in getting here.
Yeah, and I know, I wanted to cover all three of these, and I will, but I want to skip to number three because the number three actually informs number two, which is, what makes chat style, CloudRadial Chat, everything we're working on, what makes that really different versus like a chat tool? And this is why I said at the beginning of the webinar too, chat, like it is a chat tool, obviously. Like, I mean, there's that back and forth interface, but it's much more than that. And then like we see it, and I think I'm speaking for both of us here, that that PSA connection and the AI potential is like the big thing that's missing for a lot of MSPs. And I'm just wondering, like, is that something that you saw when you first started creating it? Like, why did you start going the AI route? Like, what really kind of inspired you to do that?
Yeah, so that was something. Once the AI kind of took off in the last 2 years or so, I saw an opportunity to pull in some of that into what I built. When I originally built it, I was trying to build it as flexibly as possible to handle, honestly, to handle not just the MSP chat solution, which you're right. I think a lot of MSPs did not want to entertain the idea of using chat for a long time because of the lack of a PSA integration. So it's funny. It's one of those things where probably more of their customers were using chat than they were, and even though they're leading the technology, effort for their customers. So getting that PSA connection kind of takes the element of risk and difficulty out of the equation for them, so you don't have to worry about, well, how is this just another way that I'm going to get hit with tickets that isn't going to get captured. So that's the big part of it. But then, yeah, pulling in the AI gives us a chance to sort of save some time. We try to save time for the MSP on the automation side by doing things like automatic assignment, automatic status updates, and things like that. But the AI is actually giving us the opportunity to try to save them time in terms of triage, and I think you and I both think that in the not so distant future, actually solving problems for their customers and closing tickets before they're opened.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I want to bring that up before we talk about the pricing for it, because I think when you think about how to justify a piece of software like this, which, I just got done at a conference completely separate from this. And like a lot of times, we want to look at software, objectively, and basically saying, is the price worth what we're working for it? And then as Chris is talking about, and this is what we're getting into in like let's call it the second half of the webinar here, is when we look at the justification of when people, especially MSPs, look at getting chat, you typically have to look at like your workforce and like who is manning that chat and if they're available to do it, right? And we know that like chat's a really tricky thing. And I do mean chat now specifically because that's an expectation of a response time faster than an email, maybe a little bit. It's kind of like a phone call where you have to be there to kind of pick up. You have to be there to answer that chat. And if you don't, then automatically, like, it's very quick for that perception to go from cool, they have chat, to nobody was there, so that chat experience is bad, therefore, like, I'm not quite sure about this, right? So, a lot of times I'll say this, and I mean this, and it's kind of a hot take, but like, the AI stuff can be really gimmicky, and a lot of pieces of software in general, where it's like, I think even like there's like some of the like literal chicken websites have chat. I don't know. I get that ad on YouTube all the time where it's like, ask me about chicken recipes, and it's like, yeah, that's cool. But in an actual chat thing for MSPs, it makes all the sense in the world, right? Because again, like we're talking about a lot of times, and hopefully this is you guys, and if not, this may be people you work with or your peers. MSPs want that good chat experience, but you don't have the full staff to man it. So the AI is really sweet because it bridges that gap where you may not be there, right? You may be busy with doing a bunch of tickets or managing the service desk in general, or maybe you're sick that day, or maybe you're out for lunch, like whatever. And then that weird gap where the client initiates a chat and is looking for help and they don't get that first response because no one's there to pick it up is perfectly solved by AI, right? So this is one of the genuinely non-gimmicky versions of it because we can fill in that gap. We have that good experience. If you can't get to the chat because again, you're out for the day, at the very least, like Chris was showing in the demo, it can get to it, right? It at least logs the information, logs the ticket, it's stored, it's trackable, and that stuff means a lot. And then the best case scenario, like we're going to talk about in the show, is can it gather enough information to either ideally, right, perfectly resolve the ticket and wonderful, and it solved the issue. So my printer's acting weird, you forgot to reset it, I never hear about it, it's been closed and that's awesome. Or at the very least, like do some of the homework for me so when I do get back to my desk and try the ticket, it's there. So let's talk about pricing, and let's talk about why I think this is pretty reasonable, and this will lead us into what makes the real differences between starter, professional, and enterprise. Our pricing is public. There's nothing to hide here. It's actually on our website. So if you go to cloudradial.com and go to pricing, right, we have a bunch of different products. Again, I told you CSA is kind of our flagship. That's our portal, but obviously we're talking about chat specifically. And I wanted to talk about some of the logic behind it. So the starter version of chat starts at literally just $95 a month with a $95 setup. And everything you saw today, right? That integration across all those channels comes with it, and the slash commands to help you kind of manage stuff really quickly. So as we look at the difference between that and professional, professional is actually where the AI gets added. So again, you don't have to have that AI triaging stuff and doing all the things that we talked about. But if you feel that adds value, then you start kind of getting into doing the math for what's the ROI on something like that? Can it kind of justify its own costs? And then you get all the way to up to enterprise. And even though the cost to set that up is kind of marginal, right? So you go from, or I'm sorry, the monthly cost is $195 to $295. It's a bigger setup fee, right? Understandably. And we're going to talk about why in a second. But when you look at this, before we look at all the nitty gritty of it, the way to justify something like this is obviously, is this thing saving you time, right? So it's like the time savings with something like a AI assistant, AI chat are very tangible. Like it's not really one of those things where like, yeah, I'm sure everyone wants to look good. That may help you land a client or two, and that'll be cool. That's kind of hard to calculate. This is pretty easy, right? We're going to take the hours that, a technician could be gathering that time, or maybe the frustration. So you can actually measure kind of CSAT or NPS before and after this thing, and then also measure the time to resolve a ticket. And if you take something like your hourly rates of your techs, you kind of do a little bit of math and figure out how long it takes for them to respond. And then you run a couple of these tickets, right? And you figure out how much time it could shorten it. Then you basically understand that like pretty soon, I mean, we're seeing partners that with just a couple of tickets a month can justify a cost like this because again, hourly rates are a lot, the ticket volumes can be a lot. So this is something that we feel is pretty good, pricing model for the results that we're seeing. So keep that in mind as we look at more stuff. And again, I think if Chris is cool with it, I'd like to talk about those additional things and how much customization can we actually get when we start getting into the chat script, right? And then even when we talk about those dialogue workflows, why, like what is that, and how does that all kind of go off the deep end with customization? So if
Ricky, I
Chris,
want to mention something though, but when we talk about chat, it seems like, I mean, if you think I'm, even being here on the webinar, kind of doing a little multitasking here and there, but you're in text, you're in Teams, you're in Slack, and it's almost for the MSP, for that customer experience. As a customer, we expect it.
sure,
And like you said, and we have, had this issue ourselves. It is labor intensive. I mean, typically, if you don't have a PSA integrated chat, you're going to have somebody, basically a person dedicated to sit on top of chat to make sure that everything gets resolved. And then you've got to put the ticket in, so we've kind of just, even with the starter package, we've kind of negated that piece because the ticket gets created and gets pushed into the PSA so that the techs can start working on it. So we've already shortened that gap there. And I think as you go more into the professional side, you end up getting more of the customization, not so much as what you're going to show in enterprise, but being able to ask specific questions so that you have the possibility of maybe handling the tier 1 support and having that ticket open and actually close, to get those easy things kind of done. So again, you talk about cost savings, you're going to save not having to hire that person, because I do think the expectation is to have chat eventually anyway. But then also being able to kind of gather that back and forth or stop that back and forth so that you can gather that information into the ticket and hopefully resolve it or push it into a tech.
That's right. And the tier 1, we've talked about this a couple of different ways, and I think our VP of customer success, Evan, for those that were part of the webinar yesterday, was talking about like even ourselves, right? We're a software company, right? And we have the same thing. We have techs working tickets and whatnot. And even we struggled initially with like, how do we get chat going? Because again, babysitting that stuff. And then when it comes to like service desk efficiency, obviously it's like, you've got maybe your tier 1s and your tier 2s and however you structure that thing. And like a lot of this chat stuff, even if it doesn't outright replace it, it at least gets those, tier 1 techs not having to worry about triage and more worried about learning how to solve it so they can level up, they can be more useful. So it's a very simplistic formula. You're right. The one that I said about saving time is accurate. I mean, you can certainly look at that. Then there's that kind of stuff where it's like, well, you can train people better because you can ignore these kind of dummy tasks, triaging stuff to the right board or queue or wherever in your PSA.
How about rebooting your computer?
About rebooting your
Have
computer.
you tried to reboot?
Right? Stuff like that, but even more complex, right? Because thanks to Chris, and like the thought process that he put behind all this stuff, right? There's certain things where it's like, if I'm looking for something about an iPhone 12 or whatever, right? And I'm talking about that, like the AI is not going to just say like, okay, restart your phone. Like it can find contextual relevant things to that model, to that make. So obviously, again, ideally it could solve it because it can look up stuff that is public, that is accurate for that. But at the very least, it can give those details over to your team, right? So you know exactly all the details you need to really troubleshoot that in depth. But yes, I say we can kind of take a look at some of the back end, because that comes up a lot as far as like, okay, so I understand what it can do. I understand that like, there's a chat component, there's a lot of that stuff, but like when we're talking about chat script, when we're talking about those slash commands, how much customization power can I really have behind that stuff, and what does that look like? So Chris, can I hot potato you back another little screen share here?
Absolutely. So yes, so the customization. Ricky mentioned the 3 tiers and the slash commands I showed. There's a whole slash close, and there's a set of them that are available to you, the MSP. So inside of Teams or Slack, you can trigger those. And this is one of those things that I think is a powerful thing that's not what people first think of when they think, oh, I'm going to get a chat tool. You're thinking about, well, how am I going to communicate with my customers? And that's important. But really, you're already, there's a hesitation to bring a chat tool in because of some of the issues that Ricky and Safi mentioned, having to staff it, things like that. The reality is you're almost certainly already using a chat tool internally, and it's Teams or Slack, and there's already information that's getting lost in those chat tools that is not getting into your PSA. So that's one of the things we're trying to solve too, is not just the chat with your customers getting into a ticket, but giving you the ability to take internal chats and get them into a ticket, or get that information into the PSA in some way. So one of the ways we can do that is the slash commands. So in the professional tier, you can add new ones. And as we add new ones to the system, and as a whole, they'll come in at the starter level probably and be available. And so there are about 6 or 7 built in for things like assigning tickets, bringing up ticket details in Teams, things like that. So if I'm chatting with the bot here and I just say slash ticket card, this was ticket 2020, 2248, so I can say 2246, bring up an old ticket, and just to see the details about it. So, so at any point when you're working inside of Teams during the day, you can use commands like that to just save yourself a trip into the PSA, get a few details, and be able to, oh, I'm going to update the status here. So that's what the slash commands are for. And the reality of it is we can't build a set of slash commands that are a perfect fit for every MSP. You've got your own process, you've got your own things you want to do. And so in the professional and enterprise tiers, you can make new commands. So for example, the time card, the time entry that I showed is a slash command, and it's written in this scripting language. So it can be written in either JavaScript or PowerShell. We just add some objects to that. So whichever you're more comfortable with would be something you can write your own commands for. So say you had a term in your process that's red alert for a ticket, and you wanted that to mean that you set it to a particular status and added a note and sent a text to 3 specific people that need to jump on it right away. You could do all of that inside of a slash command fairly easily. And so any of the systems we can connect to are accessible inside the slash commands. So if I look at what we do is we have these connectors. And so inside of the connectors, the connectors wrap the systems we support. So if I go here and I create a new connector, you can see some of the ones that are available. So we can connect to a couple of different tools like Teams or Slack. We support Ring Central in a limited fashion as well. But we can call out to just random APIs and do things. I have one partner who's working with us who's doing a very cool solution using this with document signing, with e-sign capabilities. So calling out to an API and sending documents for e-signatures to specific customers based on a ticket status. It's a very specific use case, but the way we built this, it's flexible enough to handle almost any use case. And so that's what the slash commands are for, to give that level of flexibility. The other side of that, the enterprise side, comes in with this dialogue editor. So if you use the enterprise tier, we also open up some additional screens where we can work with you to create specific flows for what the bot says and does. People use this in different ways. Vetting sales leads, for example. So if somebody says they're a lead, they're not a contact, and you want to ask them 3 specific questions, and then maybe have some branches and what those answers are, and then collect all that information and do something with it. That's something you could do here. So general purpose automation type triggering things on the back end is where the slash commands come in. Changing the behavior of the bot in terms of specific logical flows is where the enterprise comes in. And yeah, so you can do lots of different things here. The thing I like to mention is, if you can picture this, but the starter template, the starter tier is built using the enterprise tier. So anything that can be done inside that's happening when you see that basic chat interaction with the customer, and that's all configurable using the enterprise screens.
Yeah, and some of the stuff like Chris was saying, and this is again why that the setup fee could be a lot, right? It's a lot because it can be really, really powerful. So again, typically the ideal person that's doing something like this has those dedicated needs that needs these separate workflows. But again, it should be kind of linear, right? You should see that the time savings that you get from doing something like this, pre-triaging, pre-offering this up, getting this available at every channel and everything you want, should make sense to kind of scale that up. And again, so far so good for us. I mean, we're seeing the people that are kind of getting the appropriate tiers are getting the value out of it at every stage. So pretty happy about all this stuff. Chris, I have a couple more questions I'd like to go through. That was some of the FAQs that came up from some of our other partners. That maybe we can cover a little bit, and then if anybody else has some stuff, we can go through it. But I think I may wrap up the strictly technical portion of it. We might have a couple more things to show and tell, but this is something that comes up quite a bit. So number one, this actually came up in one of the Q&As here in this chat, was can it be white labeled? And the answer is yeah, it can be renamed and color matched to your preferences. So obviously the goal for us is not to just say CloudRadial, CloudRadial, CloudRadial. It's your stuff, right? The whole point is that whatever brand you have going, it looks like your stuff. And then we can show that in a minute as well. We can go back to the branding capabilities of it. That's also in that console that Chris was talking about. And then customizability, like we just said, that was another one that came up yesterday during one of our webinar chats, which was basically like, how much do I need to know? Do I need to be a PowerShell expert? Because a lot of people, appreciate that they can be, but the answer is no. Like you said, how many pre-built ones are there off the bat? We have quite a bit. Is it 6 pre-built slash commands?
Yeah, I think it's 7 or 8 actually. So yeah.
Yeah, and then here's another interesting question that I think somebody else asked me offline. If somebody else has a slash command, somebody else that uses chat, is it possible to just like literally copy and paste it and trade it amongst each other? Would that work?
For the most part, yeah, unless you had some specific different connectors than they did. But out of the box, we named them specifically certain things. So yeah, and honestly, I would like to get to a point where if this tool continues to grow and succeed from an automation standpoint, that there's some sort of community support for that sort of thing for people who want to do something cool with it, to share that with the rest of the people who are using it.
Sure. Yeah, and that came up because it was, again, interesting. A partner said like it's a long distance for a lot of people between what we can do and what other people have done. And like sometimes again, it's like I'd like to be able to do slash, red alert's a great example. And like if somebody can help me figure that, if I can get that from somewhere else, which again, it sounds like if we can find partners and put them in there, that's something that we can talk about a little bit later. But like, our CloudRadial community is not just for CloudRadial, the portal. That's something we can spin up, and I'm more than happy to facilitate chat users with, people that are interested in chat. So you can talk about how, other people are using it and get some ideas there. And then one that came up yesterday that I want to reiterate, that was a good question. So back in that Teams example, can chat be routed to specific support teams? If I have different, I have company A, B, and C going to team A, and then, D, E, F going to team B. Is that stuff all workable in Teams and whatnot?
Yeah, it is. So right now it would require the professional or enterprise tier to do that. But yeah, so we can route tickets, conversations, chats, what have you, to specific channels in Teams or Slack based on some criteria about the ticket. So some MSPs have done that by customer. Some have done it by the queue or board that the ticket is on. And sometimes there's a combination of the two. So yeah, it's totally possible to route that to specific channels, and then the access that people have within Teams to that channel will decide who gets notifications about it and who doesn't, and who can jump on it.
Yeah, and then we had another good question just come in from the Q&A. Is there a limitation on the number of slash commands when you get to professional, or is it just you get to customize as many as you need?
You could make as many as you could dream of, really. There's no limit to that. So if somebody really pushes it, I might have to change the UI a little bit or something, but there's nothing that's going to stop them from making as many as they want.
You heard it here first, Jason. So if you have a insane amount of slash commands you want to get to trying, you can certainly do that.
All right. Ricky and Chris, I want you to kind of address this, but somebody just asked, can CloudRadial Chat integrate with any other language models outside of OpenAI's? And I also wanted to mention, because I know one of my customers is actually working with Chris on using a different model, and they're using Crashbank's model. And Chris is helping with that integration. So I think that the answer is yes, but I'm going to let Chris explain that better.
Sure. So we currently use the Azure OpenAI service for our AI interaction. I'm sure we could support other OpenAI like and other AI APIs over time, but at the moment, what we're supporting is the Azure OpenAI service. Now, if you have a model of your own deployed with the Azure OpenAI service, then we could easily support that just by routing the calls that we're making to the model for AI purposes to your endpoint instead of ours. And so that is at one level at which that could happen. In terms of interacting with not specifically like say an LLM or something like that, but other API type interactions that could seem like AI. For example, like the integration we do with Crushbank, using their knowledge base APIs to pull information and then combine it with other things to display to users. So we have that capability as well. But at the moment, specifically calling the Azure OpenAI service, we could call any endpoint your model, but through that method.
Sweet. Sorry, I was writing down some notes to answer to another person, but that's pretty good about, using different models, because obviously things will evolve and adapt, and like, because the solution is able to adapt to it, it's not like we're going to get stuck using, if there's a better model that comes out, like what Chris is saying, it's like we kind of have that flexibility to move forward, provided it is.
It's also nice that we brought Chris on with us too, because, when we made the acquisition, it was like, oh, we can't do this without Chris.
Yeah.
Because we had, because it's nice having him on board with us, on staff, because now he's dedicated to making this, improving it, making it better, different types of integrations. And so, I think what y'all will see as we move forward is that you'll see a lot of improvement in the solution, but it's a fabulous solution just as it stands today. So
thank you. That's very nice. And thank you for you guys have been so welcoming and nice about everything. And it's been a great experience so far. And it's nice to be part of a team.
Yeah, y'all have got the dream team on this chat. So, or should we say chat on this webinar. So if you do have any questions, this is the time to ask with both Ricky and Chris here. We're, again, as I say, they are the dream team. So.
And Jason is another good question. So in the pricing, right, we talk about this when we say like, okay, what does this last bit mean, right? 200 conversations, adding more conversations. So A, what is a conversation in general? And B, like, what is the end of a conversation? How does that all work? Do we know the hard limits of those?
Yeah, so typically we're talking about a ticket, like the conversation that happens around a ticket, start to finish. And so that could, the reason we do that and have certain limits on it is that, as we're just saying, we're using the Azure OpenAI service. So there is a cost tied to the amount of interaction we do with it. We're not trying to tie that to a specific number of messages, but just trying to kind of round it up to the solution level of, this was one chat between a tech and a person that involved some additional AI. And to that point, though, mentioning people using their own models, if you had your own model, that wouldn't apply because we'd be calling your model and it'd be your cost.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, it's not an arbitrary number. I know sometimes people see that and they're like, wait a minute, you trying to, no, truly it is like, we are getting the tax for that AI usage, and we're just basically passing it on.
So Ricky, will you answer Jason's question about pricing? He was talking about the base price.
Yeah, just did. That was the one about, I believe, let me double check if
I think his question was just based on usage, that you buy it in blocks of 200, which is
that was the conversation.
Yeah.
For the AI conversations. Yep, all good there. Again, I wanted to reiterate, because again, if you look at CloudRadial, especially if you've not seen a lot of our stuff before, and then you look at, what is it? If you Google CloudRadial, the first thing that's going to come up is this CSA. And like I said, they are completely independent. Like, you do not need the CSA to operate in chat. If you're a CloudRadial partner, CloudRadial CSA partner, the interesting thing that we're going for now, we can talk a little bit about the future, kind of where this is getting taken, is again, we have plans for a tighter integration. So like, yes, we've seen before that, like, the actual chat itself can be, the chat pop-up, like we kind of expect that in a lot of ways out of the bottom corner. That's nice. But if you look at something like a CSA, it's a client portal, which means that there's a lot of good stuff in here, right? So we've seen a lot of people that in their client portals, they might put a bunch of documentation, right? So we might have a bunch of articles, you might have a bunch of, I don't know, like courses, whatnot. You might have a bunch of like tickets. So you maybe have your onboard, offboard forms, you have whatever have you. All that stuff is in there, right? So what ends up happening is when you look at how can a chat or an AI assistant really help, add to that experience and not just be like, now there's chat in a portal. Cool. Something that we're working on and something that we're really passionate about is actually trying to link off, when we say we're working on tighter integration, is getting people not just answers, not just a ticket, but the right resources. So if I say I'm struggling, right? If I use this AI assistant to say like, not my printer's broken, but like I really don't understand Teams, or like, where's that latest executive report? We want to get to the point where it goes like, great, maybe here's what don't you understand about Teams? How to create a channel. Hey, you have a course on how to create a channel. Let me link you off to that. Let me serve that up. Or like you tell the assistant, I want to onboard a person, right? And instead of having it just spoon feed you questions or whatever, maybe it serves you out the actual onboarding form, right? To be clear, it's not something that it does today, but that's something that we're working on because again, that tighter integration not only offers a better user experience, but if we talk about the ROI and the time savings and the whole cost justification, all that stuff, that's the stuff that makes the best possible user experience. Again, AI can be very gimmicky if used in the wrong way, but this kind of stuff is absolutely the thing we're seeing with people, regular people that are just looking for getting assistance, right? We just want them to be linked off to the best resource for them. We want to make navigating and getting to things really easy. And that conversational interface, right? That's why Chris is not our director of chat. He is specifically of conversational interfaces, because this is the stuff that we believe is going to add a bunch of value for everybody in the future, right? So it should be a little bit more strategic for everybody. Once again, not necessary to have that with CloudRadial. That's just kind of how those two kind of work better together. But certainly, I'll say this, I guess, if unless anyone else has questions, I might start wrapping up. I'll say, if you have any, questions, you want to take a look at it, you can always get a standalone demo for specific stuff. Obviously, ask more questions here, but giving it a shot, I think, is well worth it to at least see how it works for you, and just tracking and seeing how efficient it can make you. I think that's something that we've seen a lot of people enjoy. So if anybody has questions, now's the time. Otherwise, I believe we're going to start winding down, unless either Safi or Chris have any more things you want to cover. But I think that was pretty good, I'd like to say.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. I think to your point about not chat but conversational interfaces, I think that is really one of the important distinctions about this is for people not to think about what we're doing with this as chat, but think about it as a way to give your customers the most natural feeling interface they could possibly have, and to do it in such a way that also makes them super responsive to you. I think to talk about some of the numbers you were talking about before, like I've seen it documented that the average response time to an email is 90 minutes, and the average response time to a chat message is 90 seconds. And you multiply that over the course of a few months, a year. It doesn't take long to see the time savings.
I always think about it like, what's the best way to keep them from calling? Which I know we're not supposed to say, but like, how about not using the phone?
Mhm.
Let's do but on the other side of it, I don't want to call. I'd rather just put something in. If y'all talk to AT&T, I'm using that little chat, man. I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to sit on hold. And
Absolutely.
so it's, how do you keep them from calling you? And this is another way to keep that conversation going, and giving you another avenue. So
Yeah,
I won't throw the big sales pitch on, I promise. It's
Always
hard for me, but
when the product guy and the conversational
well, I
interface,
know. Got the
the sales
text here.
come on, they're like,
Texas.
"Good."
I know.
We're good. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, again, obviously you might think of them in the best place. The shower the day after is usually where all the questions come from. Feel free to reach back out to us. Again, you can get a standalone demo. Just go to cloudradial.com/demo and you can select from there. I believe I can show that instead of just talking about it. Talk about how to get back in contact with us. So you just go to cloudradial.com, and then you're going to have the option to get a demo. Again, if you want a standalone, you want to have your very specific questions, I believe this is the best way. Don't do it today because people are going to be like, what? Just mention that you're specifically for chat, or maybe multiple if you want to really make the salespeople happy. And then other than that, you can always just reach out to us. If you already use CloudRadial and you just want, specific questions, you can always reach out to support. We'll route you out that way. And in general, if you just kind of do smoke signals our way, we'll find a way to reach out to you and answer your questions. So any capacity, we'll try to help. But I want to thank everybody for joining us for the demo. I want to thank Chris very much for giving us a big overview, and Safi also for chiming in and helping out. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their day, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.